Do you usually ask people sunbathing in their own backyard for ID, or only when they look like me? Dr. Simone Barrett's voice was calm, but it cut through the summer air like a blade. The officers froze, and from behind her curtain, Marjorie Ellison felt the heat of her mistake rise faster than the Texas sun. Marjorie Ellison believed in order. She believed in good fences, well-trimmed hedges, and neighbors who waved but didn't linger. At 61, she had lived on Sycamore Lane for nearly 3 decades, long enough to memorize who belonged where and what time they usually left their driveway each morning. After retiring from the school library, she found a new rhythm to her days: less Dewey Decimal System, more porch surveillance. Most afternoons, she sat in her weathered rocking chair with a tall glass of iced peach tea sweating on the armrest and a pair of vintage binoculars resting on her lap like a pet cat. For birdwatching, she would say if asked, though no one ever did. The birds, in her mind, walked on 2 feet and held grocery bags. They drove sedans and sometimes left their garbage bins out a day too long. The neighborhood had a cadence, and Marjorie saw herself as its metronome. It was a Saturday in late July when the first crack appeared. The air sat thick and wet against the skin, and even the cicadas sounded annoyed. Marjorie had just finished her crossword puzzle and was watching the Henderson house, the one on the corner that had been sold a month earlier. It had remained eerily quiet since the sold sign was pulled from the lawn. No moving truck. No welcome committee. No garage sale or nosy introductions. For weeks, the windows stayed dark, the mailbox rarely full. It was the kind of silence that made Marjorie itch. Until that afternoon. From behind her hedge, she spotted movement. A figure stepped onto the backyard patio. A black woman, maybe mid-40s, lean and tall, dressed in a navy blue swimsuit with a white cover-up draped over one arm. She moved with the unbothered confidence of someone at home. She set down a paperback, slipped off the cover-up, reclined on a pool chair, and adjusted her sunglasses. A glass of something cold and lemony appeared in her hand. She looked relaxed. Too relaxed. Marjorie blinked. She leaned forward. Who was this woman? There had been no introductions. No neighborhood email. No heads up from Carol down the street, who usually knew everything before it even happened. Marjorie gripped her binoculars. She hadn't seen a car in the driveway or a light turn on for more than 2 days. Now suddenly someone's sunbathing in broad daylight? She sat back, pressed her lips into a line, and reached for her phone. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. Was it an emergency? No. Not really. But it was suspicious. Wasn't it? She tapped the non-emergency line saved in her contacts under the named city response. Fort Worth PD, what's your concern today? Marjorie softened her voice into that careful blend of polite and worried, the same tone she used to get free refills at the local cafe. Hi, yes. I'm calling from Sycamore Lane. I think someone may be trespassing at the old Carter property. There's a woman in the backyard, by the pool. I don't recognize her, and the house has been empty for a while. The dispatcher's voice remained neutral. Can you describe her? She's, black. Mid-40s, I'd guess. Wearing a swimsuit. She's just lying there like she lives there. Any signs of forced entry? No, but you know how easy it is to jump a fence. I don't want to assume anything, but it doesn't feel right. The dispatcher thanked her and promised to send someone to check it out. Marjorie ended the call and placed her phone on the table, then resumed her watch. The woman hadn't moved. She flipped a page in her book, took a sip of her drink, and stretched like she hadn't a care in the world. Marjorie frowned. She wasn't sneaking around, wasn't hiding. She was too calm. That, somehow, made her more suspicious. 8 minutes later, a squad car rolled slowly down Sycamore Lane. Then another. Marjorie stood, straightened her blouse, and stepped onto the walkway with a watering can, feigning casual activity. The first officer exited the vehicle, tall, square-jawed, Latino. The second, younger, pale, barely 30. They scanned the area, then spotted her. "Ma'am, did you make the call?" the older officer asked. Yes, Marjorie said, nodding toward the backyard. "She's right back there." They approached the wooden side gate and found it unlocked. Quietly, but not stealthily, they stepped into the yard. Marjorie held her breath. Her heart tapped nervously behind her ribs. Maybe she was right. Maybe they'd find someone squatting or stealing or... Instead, she saw the woman sit up. No panic. No guilt. Just a slow, deliberate movement, like someone annoyed at being disturbed. She set her book aside, placed her drink on the table, and stood. Officer Ramirez approached. "Ma'am, we're responding to a call. There's been a report of possible trespassing. Do you live here?" The woman tilted her head slightly and pulled her sunglasses down, just enough to make direct eye contact. Her voice was steady, low, and unmistakably in control. "Yes, I do. My name is Dr. Simone Barrett. I bought this house 3 weeks ago. Would you like to see some ID?" The younger officer, clearly unsure, nodded. "Yes, please." She walked to a small cabinet, unzipped a leather tote, and pulled out her wallet. From it, she presented a badge. Not just any badge. The sunlight caught the emblem, United States Intelligence Community. Deputy Director. The pause was thick. Ramirez shifted his weight. "Apologies, Dr. Barrett. We weren't informed. Just responding to a call." Simone's voice didn't rise. It didn't falter. "Do you usually ask people sunbathing in their own backyard for ID? Or only when they look like me?" The officers exchanged a glance. The silence stretched. "It's just standard procedure, ma'am," the younger one said quietly. "Of course it is," she replied, flipping the badge shut. "Now, if you're done, I'd like to return to my afternoon." The officers nodded awkwardly, muttered their apologies, and walked out the same way they came in. Marjorie stood stiffly behind her hydrangeas, the weight of realization pressing on her spine. The woman wasn't an intruder. She wasn't a squatter. She owned the house. She ran part of the country's intelligence operations. And Marjorie had just called the police on her. Later that evening, the neighborhood group chat buzzed. A blurry photo, clearly taken through a fence, had been posted. Simone in her swimsuit, badge in hand, 2 officers frozen mid-apology. The caption read, "When the new neighbor is more qualified than the entire HOA." The comments were worse. "Y'all really called the cops on the Deputy Director of National Intelligence? This is why folks keep to themselves. I hope she doesn't audit our Wi-Fi from space." Marjorie set her phone down and looked out the window. Simone had returned to her pool chair, legs crossed, book open again, calm as ever. Not rattled. Not smug. Just unbothered. Marjorie, on the other hand, felt the edges of her world shift. The street didn't feel like hers anymore. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure that was a bad thing. Because sometimes, the story you think you're watching is actually watching you. The binoculars stayed on the table, untouched, for 3 straight days. Marjorie Ellison hadn't so much as stepped onto her porch since the incident. Her rocking chair, usually occupied around 2 p.m. sharp with a crossword puzzle and a cold glass of tea, sat still and empty under the oppressive July sun. Inside, the air conditioner hummed steadily, but it couldn't drown out the buzz in her mind or the ripple effect she had unleashed across Sycamore Lane. After the officers left Dr. Barrett's yard, Marjorie had walked inside without a word, set down her phone, and stared out her living room window for what felt like hours. The street looked the same, but nothing felt the same. She didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, still in her bathrobe, she typed Simone Barrett into her tablet. The search results were immediate and overwhelming. Headlines. Photos. Public appearances. Senate panels. Classified briefings. Ivy League credentials. Awards and commendations stacked like trophies in a digital shrine to intelligence and power. There she was, standing beside senators, flanked by security, speaking into a row of microphones with absolute command. Simone Barrett wasn't just some homeowner with a fancy grill. She was a high-ranking federal officer who had spent the last 20 years managing counterintelligence operations around the globe. And Marjorie had called the cops on her because she didn't recognize her face in a swimsuit. She closed the tablet and sat very still. Her stomach felt heavy. A shame that settled not like a wave but like cement. It wasn't just that she was wrong. It was how publicly, embarrassingly wrong she had been. And now the neighborhood knew. That part didn't take long. The Sycamore Lane group chat, usually filled with casserole recipes and complaints about recycling pickup, had turned into a digital courtroom. Someone had snapped a photo from behind a fence the moment Simone showed her badge to the officers and posted it with a single caption, "When your new neighbor could probably run the whole street and the country." The comments came fast and sharp. This is why people mind their business. Imagine thinking you're doing the neighborhood a favor and almost getting a federal lawsuit instead. Marjorie didn't comment. She didn't even open the app after that first night. On Monday, she saw Carol, her longtime friend and gossip partner, walking her terrier across the street. Usually, Carol waved. Today, she didn't even glance up. Mr. Patel, the retired math teacher 2 doors down, who always said good morning while watering his roses, avoided eye contact completely. It stung. But she couldn't blame them. Not really. Marjorie had crowned herself the protector of Sycamore Lane. She had taken it upon herself to monitor who belonged and who didn't, and in doing so, she had exposed an ugliness that even she hadn't known was festering inside. 3 days after the call, her doorbell rang. Not expecting anyone, she peeked through the peephole and nearly stumbled backward. Simone Barrett stood on her porch. No sunglasses, no badge in hand, just her. Her posture calm, expression unreadable. Marjorie opened the door slowly, her hand trembling on the knob. "Good afternoon," Simone said, her voice even. "I figured we should speak face to face." Marjorie opened her mouth, but words caught in her throat. "I know you made the call," Simone continued. "It wasn't hard to guess. You're always on your porch. And you've never seen me. So that made me suspicious, right?" Marjorie nodded slightly, her throat dry. I didn't know. That I live here?" Simone finished. "Or that someone like me could live here." The words weren't shouted. They were delivered with surgical precision, cool and deliberate. Marjorie felt her face flush. "I made an assumption," she whispered. Simone nodded once, slowly. "You did. And I get it. I really do. You thought you were doing your part. But that assumption could have gone very differently. I had my badge. I had my credentials. But what if I didn't? What if I'd been someone's nephew house-sitting, or a teenage kid visiting their aunt, or just another black woman trying to sit by a pool?" Marjorie swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Simone didn't say it's okay. She didn't offer a pardon. She simply said, "I'd like to enjoy my home without someone watching me through binoculars." There was a long pause. Then, with nothing more to add, she turned and walked down the steps. Marjorie closed the door quietly behind her and stood in the hallway for a long time. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not with cruelty. Not with rage. Just with truth so sharp it didn't need to raise its voice. The following afternoon, Officer Ramirez returned. Marjorie recognized him instantly as the older of the two who had responded that day. She stepped onto her porch before he even knocked. "Afternoon, Ms. Ellison," he said. "Just a follow-up." She nodded stiffly. "Of course. I wanted to let you know that reports like that, when they turn out to be false and potentially biased, they get logged. If it becomes a pattern, it may be reviewed as harassment or discriminatory behavior." "I understand," she said, her voice thin. "I'm not here to scold you," he continued. But I do think it's important you ask yourself who you thought you were protecting this street from. And why. That night, Marjorie couldn't sleep. The house felt different now. Not haunted exactly, but no longer a fortress of righteousness. It was just brick and wood and silence. She wandered into her living room and looked out the window toward the Carter house. Simone's lights were on. Through the slats of her blinds, Marjorie could see her moving around inside, calm, deliberate, living her life. No longer a mystery. No longer a shadow. Just a neighbor. A neighbor Marjorie had failed. She didn't go outside the rest of the week. She let the mail pile up. She didn't trim her bushes. The porch stayed empty. Her usual texts with Nancy went unanswered. The woman she thought she was, the one who helped maintain community order, was slipping out of reach. And all she could do was sit with the weight of it. Because now, it wasn't Simone who looked out of place on Sycamore Lane. It was her. The mail sat untouched for 3 days before Marjorie finally gathered the nerve to walk outside. It was a Thursday morning, and the Texas sun was already burning through the morning haze like it had a point to prove. Her slippers scuffed against the concrete as she made the short walk to the mailbox, hoping no one would be outside. But even that felt like a performance now, her every movement weighed down by the invisible eyes of neighbors who once waved without hesitation. She used to be the one watching from behind curtains. Now, the street watched her. The shift was quiet but unmistakable. Conversations paused when she stepped onto her porch. Greetings that once came easily now stalled in the throat. Even Mr. Patel, who once offered gardening tips with the friendliness of an old friend, merely nodded before returning to trimming his rose bushes in silence. Carol, who had once called her every other day to trade notes on the block, hadn't sent a single message since the photo of Dr. Barrett and her badge hit the group chat. Marjorie had opened their conversation thread twice, thumb hovering over the keyboard, but what was there to say? I made a mistake felt like too little, too late. I didn't know felt worse. She spent most of her time indoors now. Her living room, once filled with pride and quiet certainty, felt dim and brittle. The binoculars still sat on the table by the window, now covered in a thin layer of dust. She couldn't bring herself to move them. In a strange way, they had become a monument to a version of herself she no longer trusted. The woman who once thought she was the block's protector now understood that she had been protecting the wrong things. Her comfort. Her assumptions. Her illusion of control. And that illusion had come at someone else's expense. It was late Friday afternoon when her inbox pinged. A message from the Sycamore Lane Community Board. The subject line read, "Neighborhood Meet and Greet, this Saturday." She clicked it open. The message was brief, but the tone was unmistakably warm. Hosted by Dr. Simone Barrett. Light refreshments, music, and conversation in the backyard of 1842 Sycamore Lane. Let's build bridges, not fences. Marjorie stared at the screen, heart thumping. She read the message again. And again. She didn't know what stunned her more, that Simone was inviting everyone over, or that she had chosen to say let's instead of you should. It wasn't a call-out. It was an olive branch. And somehow, that made it harder to ignore. She didn't RSVP. She couldn't. What would she say? That she'd bring cookies and guilt? That she was sorry for the noise, both literal and metaphorical? That she had built fences in her mind long before anyone moved in next door? Saturday arrived, dry and blazing. Marjorie dressed 3 separate times. She changed from a blouse to a sundress, back to a cardigan, then finally settled on a simple linen top and tan slacks. She wrapped up a plate of cinnamon scones, her best recipe, the one she used to win first place at the county fair 10 years ago, and stood at her front door, frozen. Through her living room window, she could already see a small crowd gathering in Simone's backyard. Mr. Patel was there, laughing with Simone. The Lopez twins zipped by on scooters while their father sipped lemonade near the grill. Even Carol was there, talking to Simone like nothing had ever happened. Marjorie paced her foyer, then opened the door. The sunlight struck her face like a question she wasn't ready to answer. Still, she stepped out, each footfall deliberate, the foil-wrapped plate trembling slightly in her hands. It felt like walking into a courtroom, or maybe a confessional. As she crossed the street, Simone turned. Their eyes met. Marjorie stopped short, then continued forward. The conversations around them kept going, but the space between the two women felt suspended in time. Simone greeted her, not with a forced smile, not with polite disinterest, but with something quiet and real. Marjorie extended the plate. They're cinnamon scones. Homemade. Simone accepted them, her eyes never leaving Marjorie's face. Thank you. There was a long pause. Then, barely above a whisper, Marjorie said, I had a lot of excuses. None of them were good. Simone nodded slowly, her expression calm but unreadable. I didn't invite you because I forgot what happened. I invited you because I remembered. And I figured you needed this more than anyone. The words didn't sting. They settled. Like rain on dry earth. Marjorie let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. I do, she said. I really do. Simone motioned toward the back patio. Come on. There's shade by the fig tree. It's cooler over there. Marjorie followed her, and for the next hour, she listened. She listened to Simone talk about her nieces in Dallas. About her favorite barbecue spot in D.C. About the 9 months she once spent undercover in a pharmaceutical company. Neighbors wandered in and out of conversations, laughing, sharing stories. Kids played on the lawn. Someone started playing jazz from a Bluetooth speaker. And for the first time in a long time, Marjorie didn't feel like the center of the block. She felt like part of it. Standing under the fig tree, sipping sweet tea, she watched as Simone moved through the crowd, not as a deputy director, not as someone who needed to prove herself, but as a woman simply at home. Later that evening, Marjorie returned to her house and sat on the porch. She didn't bring out the binoculars. She didn't need to. She looked at the Carter house, now Simone's house, and felt something shift. Not the street. Not the people. But herself. Because the truth was, she had spent so many years guarding the neighborhood, she had forgotten to open her own gate. And sometimes, the hardest part of change isn't admitting you were wrong. It's showing up different the next time. And she had. Because safety doesn't come from fences or phone calls. It comes from understanding. And belonging? Belonging starts with seeing people, really seeing them. And being willing to let them see you back. Sometimes, we convince ourselves that we're protecting something, our homes, our communities, our way of life, when in reality, we're protecting our comfort, our assumptions, and our own fears. Marjorie Ellison believed she was doing her duty as a neighbor. She thought she was keeping her street safe. But what she truly did was make a snap judgment about someone she didn't know, based entirely on appearance and silence. The story of Marjorie and Dr. Simone Barrett reminds us how powerful and dangerous those silent assumptions can be. What might seem like a concerned call to one person could be an act of humiliation, profiling, or even danger to another. And in today's world, where differences are still too often met with suspicion, we are all responsible for checking our biases before acting on them. This isn't just a story about embarrassment. It's a story about growth. It shows us that redemption doesn't come from pretending nothing happened. It comes from taking responsibility, listening, and having the courage to show up differently the next time. Marjorie didn't get everything right. But she chose humility. She chose to learn. And most importantly, she chose to walk across the street with an open heart instead of closed eyes. So here's the lesson: don't let fear or unfamiliarity decide how you treat people. If you find yourself about to judge someone simply because they don't fit your mental picture of who belongs, pause. Ask yourself, belong to what? And who gave you the right to decide? The next time someone new moves into your neighborhood, greet them. Don't scan them from behind curtains or whisper in group chats. Extend a hand, offer a smile, and get to know the person before letting fear speak on your behalf. Because real safety, real community, isn't built on fences or binoculars. It's built on connection, understanding, and trust.